right. Good afternoon, everyone. Or yes, it is afternoon. Thank you for coming today. Today we have our state ledge session. We're going to go quickly over some General Assembly session updates, federal updates as it pertains to Montgomery County and the council, and then our goals are to get through all the remaining local and bi-county bills that we have here today, and then get a preview of some of the state bills. There are particularly a number of bills on climate and environmental issues that hopefully we'll get to just highlight and then take up more in depth at another time. So with that, Ms. Wenger, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Melanie Wenger, Director of Government Relations for Montgomery County. And as far as the General Assembly session update, it's a major work in progress. The House bill filing deadline was on Friday, so as of this morning, we have really the entire package that will be before the General Assembly, accepting anything that is a major piece of legislation that could come in late, and in a year like this, that is a possibility. As far as the budget, obviously budget and energy are the two big issues of the session. With the budget, continuing to kind of unfold as the problems become more upfront and personal, and as more problems become identified. Just as a timeline on that, the House Appropriations Committee will move the state operating budget and capital budget first this year. They go back and forth, and their hearings on the operating budget end on March 3rd, so I would assume that they'll begin to make their decisions by the end of that week. And that's pretty much what's going on there. And
Hi, Sarah Morningstar, Office of Intergovernmental Relations. Federal update, keeping it to the county. The county departments have come up with 11 draft proposals for FY26 earmark requests. Seems that FY25 has not been passed yet, as we all know. Things need to be wrapped up by the 14th of March, but we've been requested by our delegation to get our projects in the queue for FY26. So I will be coming to you again at our next meeting to talk about those. The Congresswoman McLean Delaney has opened up a portal. All these projects go into a portal for consideration. Her portal was opened, I believe, on Friday. It'll close on the 7th of March. So nothing will be submitted to the portal before getting your view of what's being proposed. And they're across a bunch of different departments: police, transportation, emergency services, HHS. So you'll be able to see that. We have met with our Senate delegation policy staff to go over what those projects are, to get some just ideas for what they think is viable, eligible. These earmarks, as we know, are existing federal programs, so you then have to fit within the categories of those federal programs. So that's about it.
Thank you. All right, not seeing any questions or anything from colleagues. We can move on to walking through the memo and discussing our local and bi-county legislation. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President. Kathleen Boucher, Intergovernmental Relations. These next two bills are requested by WSSC, and just to let you know, Kenneth Simons, a Government Affairs Manager with WSSC, is here as well, if you have any questions. Under current law, WSSC has authority to enter into a design-build contract if the amount exceeds $2 million. The bill repeals that provision and allows the Commission to adopt regulations establishing its own alternative project delivery and solicitation methods. And County Executive supports the bill.
All right. Any comments or questions? Anyone considering us taking a position on this? All right, then I guess the council will hold on this in no position.
Okay, this second bill is also requested by WSSC. As it came in, it would have allowed WSSC to create customer classes for water and sewer rates. WSSC is requesting that it be amended to essentially strike the bill and allow for WSSC to make customer classes for the ready to serve charge WSSC, which is a two-part fixed fee, an account maintenance fee, an infrastructure fee that you pay when you hook up a meter to WSSC, and they're asking for authority to create customer classes within those fixed fees. The bill actually specifies that what they're worried about is residential customers who have a 1.5-inch meter, much like many commercial entities, but that have that because of sprinkler system requirements. There's actually a preamble in the bill that references sprinkler systems.
Anyone have any questions on that one? Move to support. I have Councilmember Friedson move to support. Do I have a second? Second. Councilmember Sales, second. Any other questions? No? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous of those who are here. Okay.
So the next piece of legislation is something we've talked about over the years. It has to do with the county's school bus enforcement camera program, on a piece of legislation that passed at the very end of session last year, and the ongoing debate about this, that would have required the Montgomery County, beginning on December 31, 2026, for any school bus stop that was located on any highway with 5 or more undivided traffic lanes had to either be relocated, or if it could not be relocated, it would require the county to place crossing guards or some other technology there to ensure the safety of students exiting the school bus. So what this piece of legislation does, and I think it was recognition that the county, if nothing changed, probably could not comply with that law. And so what this piece of legislation does is it removes the requirement that was also in the bill as it came in, that all uncontested fine money be given to the State Highway Administration in order to build medians at these locations. So again, recognizing that was a bit impractical because it does not raise a lot of money. Any money that is generated out of those contested tickets that go to district court would come to the county for the same purpose that all fine revenue is for public safety purposes. So again, not a lot of money, so that was recognized that it would not have resulted in many medians being built. Also, there's a narrowing of the requirement that was placed into law last year that would require us to move stops or place crossing guards, so that it would only apply to those stops where there's in excess of 400 citations that are issued in the prior fiscal year. And for those, so that substantially narrows the number of locations where the county may, if there's not intervening changes, because there's 2 years out, this would be in 2028, where they would have to place crossing guards or some technology that doesn't exist right yet for those stops. So that reduces it down to about 11 locations if the law were to take place today. But again, this extends that out to 2028 before that new restriction would apply. I should note, too, that this, I think, was passed favorably with the amendments I talked about by the House delegation on Friday. But this has been one of those pieces of legislation that had not come up before the council, and therefore you didn't have an opportunity to take a position on the bill.
Great. And the county executive supports with the amendments discussed?
He does.
Okay. Any colleagues, questions? Councilmember Sales? Move to support. Do I have a second? Yeah, with the amendments. Move to support with the amendments. Councilmember Sales and Council Vice President Jawando, second. Any other comments? All right, not seeing any. All those in favor? And that's unanimous.
I would note that these bills are, that the House delegation passed, that they are going to the Senate delegation.
Yeah.
So it still is, certainly worth commenting on if you have a need to, feel a need to do that. The next piece of legislation is a fairly new piece of legislation. That's why you never took it up. It was a late file bill, so it did not receive a public hearing in the county, but was heard at a public hearing in Annapolis a couple of weeks ago. It creates a Silver Spring Purple Line Construction Zone Parking Improvement Grant Program. The way the bill is written, it would be $50,000 a year, a mandated appropriation on the governor to fund it for the next 2 years. There's a technical issue in the bill. You can't mandate the governor to fund in the current year because he's already put his budget in. So, however, when discussions with, I guess, the sponsor and Legislative Services told her to go ahead and leave the date in the bill as it was originally drafted, should there be an opportunity for funding to occur this year. And there are ways to do that, but they're require the action of the legislature or a supplemental appropriation by the governor or a supplementary appropriation. So that is the way the bill's written right now, and that is how the House delegation passed the piece of legislation, which they did so on Friday.
Great. Before I turn to Councilmember Sales, I'll just say that the Transportation and Environment Committee, I had a session the other day on a bill I introduced, and a number of colleagues have supported on parking permits in the downtown Silver Spring area. I think this legislation by Delegates Charcuti and Moon and Wilkins is another effort to raise the issues that many of our businesses in particular are feeling in the downtown Silver Spring area, given the protracted Purple Line construction, other construction going on there, and just how hard it's been for them, particularly coming out of COVID, to really deal with this situation. And so I know there's been a number of meetings and really looking at how we can support the businesses there. Chair Glass is going to lead us this afternoon in discussions with folks from the Purple Line, but we're looking at least a few more years, a couple more years, of ongoing construction. So, Councilmember Sales.
I was just going to mention the bill you introduced, Council President Stewart, and seeing if this bill would supplement any resources we provide locally, or would it impact the bill at all?
This would be a state appropriation, so it would supplement.
Okay, that's all. Move to support.
Thank you. Second, I have Councilmember Sales support, moving to support. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez second. Any other comments on? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous.
The next three bills deal with highways. The first one would authorize Montgomery County to decrease the maximum speed limit on a highway without performing an engineering and traffic investigation. The county executive supports the bill. The House delegation voted the bill out, and it will go to Environmental Transportation Committee for a hearing on the 20th of February.
Okay. Councilmember Sales?
This bill failed last year. Do we know why?
There was concern about there being a provision in there to allow speed cameras to be on those bills once the speed limit was lowered. And it passed in the House. With that, it went to the Senate, and there were objections about expanding speed camera use.
Do we know why?
Because there are some people that don't like speed cameras.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, move to support.
But that piece was not put into this bill. It is now
Okay.
just an engineering and traffic.
Okay. Move to support.
All right, I have one motion to support. Do I have a second? Councilmember Katz, any other questions on this bill? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Quick question, should we jump to page 6 and do SB 424 now, since it's similar?
If you'd like to do that, sure.
Sure, if folks want to go. There are a couple of local bills that have sort of companion state bills, and this is one of them on page 6.
So 420, SB 424 was heard in the Senate. This is essentially a bill very similar to our local bill, but it would be on state highways.
Councilmember Sales?
Move to support.
Support. Do I have a second? Councilmember Katz, any other questions on this state bill? Not seeing it. All those in favor of supporting, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. All right.
Flipping back then to page 4, if we go to MC 425, that is, would authorize the use of stop sign monitoring systems technology. Legislation to do this in Prince George's County was approved last year. This would be, that it would be for Montgomery County. It will be heard in the Environment and Transportation Committee on the 21st of February.
Councilmember Sales?
Move to support.
All right, and move to support. Do I have a second? Councilmember Katz? Any questions or comments on this one? No. All those in favor, please raise your hand, and that's unanimous.
The third bill, local bill, is MC 17-25. This is a bill to authorize Montgomery County to locate speed cameras on roads identified in the county that have high injury network indicators, which is a lot of locations. 40 locations are currently restricted under current law due to them being either in a commercial zone or having speed limits of 35 or under. That's the local bill, which then will be heard in ENT as House Bill 1173. There's no hearing date yet, but it will be heard in ENT. Council President, that then coincides with, if we flip to the state page, I believe.
That's the first, it's on the same page.
Correct, I'm sorry. Right, that this then would be statewide application, again, for a similar high injury network roads on state highways. So if you were first doing, okay.
Okay, and for Bill MC 17-25, was that discussed on February 7th? or-
It was,
Okay,
yes, and approved.
okay. So let's take up, I guess, just so we don't confuse ourselves, first, the local bill that's moving forward, and that'll be now HB 1173, is that correct? Yes. I have a motion to support. Do I have a second? Councilmember Katz. Not seeing any questions. All those in favor? And that is everyone. And then the next was right below it, HB 348, SB 520. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez moved, and Councilmember Falcom second. Any comments or questions on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's it. Everyone.
Do we want to roll right in then?
Let's go ahead and move into the statewide bills.
Yep.
We haven't already taken out, so.
Yep.
First is Sarah. So.
Okay, so on page 6, there are two bills, well, total of 4, but HB 744, SB 590. These two bills, and HB 883 and SB 710, were introduced very similar to the legislation that was introduced last year to deal with the serious injury to Police Sergeant Pat Kep. The first bill deals with changes to the transportation article having to deal with reckless, negligent, and aggressive driving. I can go through and tally all of those, but it's...
We're good. All right. So I have Councilmember Sales move to support. Do I have a second? Councilmember Balcom second. Any questions on this? All right, not seeing it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous.
And then for HB 883, SB 710, that's dealing with changes to the criminal law article to include motor vehicles.
All right.
Under criminal, again, similar to last year.
Councilmember Sales moves to support. Councilmember Balcom second. Not seeing any questions. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was quickly and efficiently done.
We're getting some time back today.
Yeah. The next bit of bills, we were going to have us just kind of review what we have coming up in the state. If there is one that someone wants to discuss for taking up today, we can, but our plan today had been to, highlight these and get more information, but, so, yeah. Do you want to start us?
Thank you, Madam President. Garrett Fitzgerald with DEP, where I serve as Section Chief for Climate Programs and State Policy and honorary member of the Intergovernmental Team. So there are half a dozen energy and climate bills in the packet. I'm going to talk about the first 4, which essentially were brought to us over the last 2 weeks as a big energy package. So the first one, HB 505, that you see on page 7, this is the governor's big energy bill this year. That this bill renames the state's renewable portfolio standard, which requires utilities to buy a certain amount of the power they deliver to all of us from clean renewable sources, renames it the Clean Energy Standard and includes nuclear now. So this will be our, for moving forward, we'll be counting nuclear alongside of renewables. And it does a few things to have the state essentially solicit projects for new nuclear power plants, which are presumed to be built as small modular reactors, which is sort of a new type of nuclear power plant that hasn't been built and is not yet in commercial use, but which a few different states are currently working towards. So we see that as the future of getting to zero carbon energy in Maryland as a complement to solar and wind. You can immediately forget about that bill because the leadership, Senate and House leadership last week then dropped their big energy package, which is 3 bills. And the first bill, HB 1035, takes the vast majority of the governor's bill and incorporates it. And it does a couple other things too. So these were presented as a package. HB 1035 will do 2 major things. So it'll accelerate the development of natural gas power plants in Maryland. There's a sense from the legislature that electricity bills are going up, and they're going to keep going up over the next couple of years. One of the major causes for that is there isn't enough power being produced in the region and in Maryland specifically. So we want to solve that problem by bringing new power plants online as quickly as possible. The one type of big power plant you can bring online quickly is natural gas. So the intent here is to incentivize new natural gas power plants to come online. The state is not throwing money at them, but essentially will expedite the review there, and it's essentially sending a signal to the market that if you're interested in building a natural gas power plant, we're probably going to approve it. So this is a departure from our climate goals because natural gas does emit carbon pollution. There's a hope that they'll be able to convert those power plants to run on clean hydrogen in the future, which would not have a carbon impact. That's not a technology that works, at least at present. We'll see if that ever actually pans out. So that bill, that first bill, would do those 2 things: accelerate natural gas power plants and incorporate what the governor wants to do to make it a lot easier for new nuclear power plants to be built in Maryland. It does a couple other things too, but those are the major pieces. I'm going to skip over the next one, and then the third of the package is HB 1037. That one essentially just requires Maryland to get our act together in planning our energy infrastructure. So right now, we don't have a comprehensive plan for energy in Maryland, and that is leading to a lot of these problems that we're seeing now: not enough power, problems with transmission lines, problems with energy costs. So it requires us to start planning for the future. That one will be universally loved. The one in the middle, HB 1036, will have more implications for us as a county. So this is the solar bill. We worked very hard on this with MACO over the last 12 months since the previous session. We're working toward a compromise. There are pieces of that have come into this bill, but this is not reflective of the compromise that MACO had worked out. That essentially paused as the change has happened in federal leadership, and there are questions about whether some of the incentives that are out there federally for big solar projects will continue. So what we see in HB 1036, the solar bill, which is officially introduced by Chair Feldman and Chair Wilson, again presented as part of this leadership package. This bill, the major thing this bill will do is it says local governments will no longer be able to prevent solar projects above 2 megawatts from being built nor put conditions on them. Any project that does comply with statewide standards which are outlined in this bill. So the bill says from now on, if you want to build a larger solar project above 2 megawatts, here are the conditions in terms of setback from adjacent property, visual buffers, making sure you're not removing topsoil from the site. As long as a future solar project is built in conformance with those 5 or 6 requirements, local governments can't say no. So this will be a big departure from the ZTA that we have in the Ag Reserve now, right? That's the implication. It does a couple other things too. So it says the same thing about battery storage. So similarly, requirements are placed on future battery storage. Our big concern with battery storage is generally speaking going to be built in a much smaller physical space than large solar fields. Big concern there is probably with fire suppression. The other thing the bill talks about right now is that local governments and state government will no longer be able to tax solar projects either on personal property tax or real property tax. Local governments would be allowed to impose a payment in lieu of taxes requirement on these projects, which on our kind of initial draft calculations appears to bring in significantly less revenue to the county than we get through personal property tax right now. So the big departures from the bill that MACO had worked on for a long time, the siting standards are not the same as the siting, in terms of setbacks and visual buffers and some of those things that MACO had negotiated. the piece where we wouldn't be able to tax these projects anymore. That is brand new. So MACO is going to work very actively on these issues. Our hope is that this bill might evolve a little bit. Again, presented as part of the leadership package, the bill is probably pretty likely to move forward in some form. County Executive has not taken a position on any of these bills yet. This is just to let you know these just dropped last week, and we'll be working on this as session goes along.
Any, Councilmember Sales?
Yeah, I had a question. Did the administration have any guidance on the goal for the energy mix? Like, what should be nuclear, what the goal is, or has he defined any, like, minimums for any of the energy sources?
They do. So the governor's bill would essentially maintain the same under existing Maryland law with our renewable portfolio standard. There are targets for the amount of our power that should come from renewable sources, solar, primarily solar, wind, geothermal. The governor's bill would maintain those and then increase the target and allow nuclear to count essentially for the increase. So it maintains these quantitative goals for renewable energy. That part was not brought into the leadership bill, so we'll see what happens to that part in particular. The other piece is one of these says that we're trying to build an amount of new natural gas to offset the amount of our power that currently comes from coal and oil at peak time. So in the summertime, when everybody's got their air conditioners going, that's when we use the most electricity. That's the hour, the peak hour during the summer is the hour that we have all the power plants turned on in Maryland right now. So during that time, we have coal power plants, we have some oil burning power plants that come online to make sure that enough electricity is on the system. Those are the highest polluting sources of energy. So one of these, the bill that says we want to build new natural gas power plants specifically says we want to build the quantity of that to offset so that hopefully we can see those coal plants and oil plants no longer be used. Those are the two ways in which there are numbers that show up in these bills.
But then we'll be stuck with the oil.
Hopefully, we wouldn't see the oil, the reality, we would be stuck with the new natural gas power plants that are built. And of course, all of these power plants bid into a market. There's a market system that in the PJM territory that includes Maryland and 12 states around us, they say, hey, we need power. Who's ready to produce power? Everybody says, I can produce power this amount, this amount, this amount. And there's an auction process, essentially. So all of these power plants, including the coal and oil power plants, will still be physically there, could still participate in the auction. It'll depend on what's economically viable under the market system in the future, what really gets turned on.
Councilmember Malcolm.
Thank you. I'd like to pull out House Bill 1036, the jurisdictional question, and if the body's ready to oppose this, I think that's, regardless of the parameters of the bill, it basically states that local jurisdictions, the legislation would prohibit local jurisdiction from adopting zoning laws, and so I think that we should oppose this bill.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion, second. Councilmember Lass.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I appreciate Councilmember Balcom noting this and wanting to engage in a conversation. Quite frankly, I think this is a very big discussion, signified by the fact that the governor and the chairs of the committees of jurisdiction in Annapolis are leading this effort. Because just before we took up this bill, it was noted that Maryland is not producing enough energy. And if we are in a climate crisis and we need to produce enough energy, we need to produce enough energy. And just like I have opposed legislative efforts in, let me rephrase this, just like on the council, I have opposed efforts to restrict, not wanting to say a double negative here, so let me rephrase what I'm going to say. In Annapolis, there have been efforts to allow for statewide bills that support more housing. And there have been expressions of concern and opposition from this body, this term and previous terms, because of the perception that it overrules local jurisdiction and local authority. I think that is short-sighted because, again, I think this is a bigger conversation. And so I don't think we're ready to take a vote right now, so I don't think we should. To my colleagues, I'd be willing to motion to table this because I think it needs to be put in context of the state's energy situation and how we as Montgomery County can support our own energy goals. This might not be the right way. The intent might not be the perfect, but I think that's why it warrants more conversation.
Anyone else? Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, I appreciate it. It is a big conversation. There is a lot of topic of conversation on this, a lot at MACO, Maryland Association of Counties, that several of us have been part of as well. This is a major question of local land use authority on our need to move forward with our climate goals, on the balance that we have tried to strike and the challenges there. Lost in the land use question here is also the impact on the personal property tax. We have made efforts on that. There's a revenue piece of this. There's also legislation that we have at the council that specifically looks at and dedicates aspects of the personal property tax to agricultural land preservation and the impact that this bill would have. It would essentially override that as well. So it's a big conversation, but there are a number of significant concerning elements to this from a local authority standpoint and our ability to address these issues at the local level on the land use side, but also on the fiscal side as well, on the land preservation side. So I do think we should engage in the conversation. The timing of engaging in that conversation and the manner in which we do, I think we can decide, but I think it's an important conversation. I think we need to be part of it.
Gerald, can you tell us where is this bill and what's coming up for it?
Yeah, they've just assigned hearing dates, so the bill, it looks like it'll have first hearing in the House and the Senate on February 28th. And between now and then, I would expect MACO will be very vocal on this, and we should, whatever we do independently, we should obviously also engage with MACO as we do.
Madam President,
Yeah.
could you speak a little bit more about the MACO engagement? And also I'll ask our rep to MACO, Councilmember Friedson, because as you noted in your introductory comments, it's an ongoing discussion, which is why I think weighing in now might stymie that ongoing discussion.
So, what I can tell you, we had a call on Friday afternoon with the MACO Land Use Group on this, that all the counties participate, very similar reaction, I think we're hearing everywhere. The siting standards, again, was very different than what had been negotiated. The taxation piece is new. I think MACO is hopeful that they'll be able to achieve some movement on those pieces, but there hasn't been a conversation, I believe, since the bill dropped. So MACO, while there was a lot of conversation over the course of the last 12 months on this, over the last couple of months, not so much. And so the bill in its final form was a surprise, and we haven't heard yet any initial reaction from conversations that MACO's been trying to have. So I have no sense for you, unfortunately, right now about how likely it is that we'll see movement on any of those individual pieces.
I do want to note that if it's February 28th, we do have state ledge on February 24th, before the 28th, just to note that for folks. So, any other colleagues? Councilmember Sales?
I would just mention that any bills or legislation that preempts local authority, MACO's going to oppose. And that's been the sentiment of the conversation. So I'll just leave that there.
Swinger, did you want to say something or no? Okay. Yep, we have a motion and a second. All right, any other questions? All right, all those in favor of taking a position of opposing HB 1036/SB 931, please raise your hand. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 2. Abstain, thank you. I'm sorry, my apologies. Councilmember Glass and Fanny Gonzalez abstain. All right.
That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald, for that update. Are there any other state bills that we want to, I know a lot of the environmental ones and climate ones were just dropped this week, and so we'll come back to those. There's a lot of pieces there. Yeah, Council Vice President.
Just a
Wanda.
question on, when are the tax bills, I know one, I always get my dates because it happens so fast and furious, the fair share and the being able to have the special taxing district for transportation and education, have those, where are those in the process?
So, yeah, the fair share is not in there. I'll talk about that in a second. So,
In
House
the
Bill-
income tax bill, which is the fair, I get them confused, but you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
So House Bill 23 is a bill, would authorize the ability for local governments to pass local laws to establish differential rates between commercial and residential property taxes.
To fund transportation and education.
That's correct. And that piece of legislation is filed only in the House, and it was heard several weeks ago in the House. Delegate Fair from Frederick County is the sponsor again this year. County executive, not a surprise, supports that piece of legislation. And then the second piece of legislation I think you're talking about, when you talk about fair share, a lot of the elements of the Fair Share Act, not all of them certainly, from last year, are actually in the Budget Reconciliation Act this year, because some of the pieces of that proposal, particularly the combined reporting piece, are part of the governor's package to reconcile the FY26 budget, and that tax package that he's proposing is actually embodied in a very, very large piece of legislation, the Budget Reconciliation Act, and that piece of legislation will be heard, I believe, in House Appropriations Committee on either February 25th or the 28th.
Okay. And then the last one is the income tax differential bill, to allow us to take advantage of previous passed legislation to go up to 3.7.
Okay, that bill is cross-filed. It's slightly different than it was introduced in prior years, and it has been heard. It was heard. It's one of our members, Julie Palachevich-Carr, has it in the House, and Senator Rosa Pepp has it in the Senate Budget and Tax Committee, and those bills have been heard.
Okay.
And you'd be familiar with them. The major difference is the creation of, I think, 8 brackets. Or 6 brackets, an addition to the number of brackets that a local government would be able to apply a different rate to. And that's the major difference in the piece of legislation this year relative to prior years.
Okay, got it. And then last question, good cause, or that's coming up.
I think that piece of legislation is being heard next week.
I think that's right. If you give me 1 second.
Yep.
Yeah. And the timing of our input having an impact, we've always argued this, talked about this over the years, how much an impact it has. If for the bills that you previously mentioned, that they've already been heard, but so the decision now is when a vote is taken. So chiming in could have some impact theoretically, or what's your,
I mean, if the body would care to take a position on anything, obviously it would be.
communicate that.
Yeah, we would communicate that.
Sorry, I was stalling for
Good cause is being heard on the 18th, both in the House and the Senate.
18th. Okay, so that one we would need to. Do we have a meeting next?
No, we do not.
Okay, so I think that one
and
we might have talked about.
Good cause was in our priority letter this year, is that correct? I think
it was.
I think we added it.
I think it was in the policy priorities, but let's quadruple check.
Stall again, please.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Do you have any?
Well, I would move, I would want to discuss that.
Okay, so how about
Yeah.
we check on good cause?
It is in the state priorities for 2025.
Okay,
So then I would move we support the bill. And if we,
okay. Ms. Wright, did you have any updates on the bill? Is it the same one as, just for everybody, since we didn't take it up yet, if you want to give some background? Is it the same one? Is
It's
it?
in the same posture. slight drafting changes, but generally the provisions are the same, I believe, as what was passed out of the House last year.
Okay, so.
I wasn't prepared to speak on that today, so if that's incorrect, I will update you.
Yep. Okay, so Councilmember Jawando, Council Vice President Jawando moved, Councilmember Mink seconded. Any conversation on good cause? I have a couple of people in the queue on other things. Yeah, Councilmember Lass.
Well, I have a question about this process.
Yeah.
I thought we didn't discuss things that were not in the packet.
True, we were having that practice, but for sake of discussion today, this was in our priority letter, and so it is legislation, yeah, and it's timely, and so it is legislation that was in our priority letter. So, because we did call it out specifically, sorry, I don't have it in front of me. My computer is not working because I don't get Wi-Fi up here.
With the priorities to support efforts to give counties clear authority to enact local laws that prohibit landlords from failing to renew a residential lease without good cause. So, yeah.
So that was in our priorities letter. All right, any other questions or anything? All right, all those in favor of supporting good cause legislation, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous. Okay, you good?
I'm done.
You're good. Did you ever let your light on, or?
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of people in the queue. I think I had Councilmember Friedson and then Councilmember Albanaz.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Albanaz, I'm guessing, had the similar questions, so I'll just preface it and then I'll maybe yield to him as the Chair of Health and Human Services. But there have been a number of conversations, including the joint conversation that we had with the delegation about what is now House Bill 429, Senate Bill 376, related to the inspection authority for nursing homes, is to restore the previous situation that was far better and to address what has frankly become a crisis. And I'm sure Chair Albanaz can speak to that even more eloquently and in depth than I could. But just wanted to get an update on the timing of that. Do we know when the hearing dates are scheduled and what the timing is?
Yeah, both bills have been heard. I think it was last Thursday was in the House, and previous to that in the Senate. The Senate hearing was sponsor only because the Senate committee had passed that bill last year. The county was well represented in the House hearing last week, both by the Commission on Aging and Dr. Earl Stoddard on behalf of the county executive, and Delegate Cullison made a strong presentation of the bill.
The hearings have already happened, so I'm not sure what impact we would have, but we've been supportive before, and I certainly maintain strong support for that, and whether or not we want to take a formal position on that or not, I yield to others on, but I'll yield back to you if you allow the chair to weigh in and yield to him on his views here.
Councilmember Albanaz?
Thank you. Yeah, I would move that we vote to take a position of support. We have discussed this issue at length, but for more context, this, of course, was an authority that was delegated to local jurisdictions during COVID under the assumption that local jurisdictions would be in a better position to have oversight of nursing homes. And we saw a significant increase and positive outcomes as a result of that local oversight, which our Department of Health and Human Services did an outstanding job in partnership with the state to ensure that there was proper oversight and authority. And this does represent a potential fiscal note, and that's where there is some debate as to how or if the money would be transferred from the state to local jurisdictions. We don't want an unfunded mandate, but more importantly than that, we want to make sure that we are doing our part to ensure that these nursing homes are operating the way they should be. This is both a moral and a financial issue for our county. So we have to figure this out regardless of who pays for what, because there is no question that if we had local control, we'd be in a much better position than the current position we are in now. So I would move that we support.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Councilmember Albanaz, a second by Councilmember Friedson. Any other conversation on this one? Not Councilmember Casales? Yep.
Yeah, so I know that, that's a good point about the fiscal impact. I'm just wondering about HHS's capacity to retake this responsibility. So that's something we'll have to discuss if that does
For sure,
happen.
for
Yeah.
sure. That's absolutely, it's a good point, and that's why we need the resources, otherwise it would
Yeah.
become an unfunded mandate, because they don't have the capacity to just simply be able to absorb this work under its current construction. We would need to add personnel and staff. But, you know, the impact of the service is so important here. But it is a good point, Councilmember Sales.
Okay. Councilmember Mink?
Just agreeing with how important this is. And last year, when we had this discussion, you know, and we said, if this is not resolved, we're coming back next year and we're going to have to pass this. And it's now next year. My office, and I know others have continued to see the need. So I look forward to voting to support this.
Then all of those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous for that one. All right. Well, we've gotten into more state bills than we had planned to today. But is there anything else the team would like to highlight? Again, our next state ledge is February 24th, or anything from council colleagues that they'd like to bring up. Councilmember Sales, yeah.
Yes, I did want us to discuss the House Bill 504, Senate Bill 429, Excellence in Maryland Public Schools Act.
Okay.
Need some advice from the council in this way, in this sense. Your staff did an outstanding presentation to you on January 28th on the blueprint and talked a lot about this bill. I can talk more. This is the bill that implements the governor's decision to pause collaborative time, that part of the blueprint, the part of the blueprint that was intended to allow teachers to spend 40% of their time outside of the classroom. And as a result of pausing that for 4 years, it's also going to be a reduction in the foundation per pupil amount, because the cost of that collaborative time was built into foundation per pupil amount, and then that actually flows through to a number of school aid formulas. So it's going to impact other school formulas, decreasing that as well. So it's tied up with money discussions. There's provisions in the BRFA that deal with the funding issues. It's an interesting move by the governor because it doesn't help the general fund this year. There's plenty of money in the special fund that funds the blueprint, but it would. There's a projection that we'll need general fund money as soon as next year. So one thing it does is reduce the cost of the blueprint. But it's a really expansive bill. It's over 60 pages, and it pauses collaboration time and then creates a bunch of programs. Happy to talk about at least the basics of them regarding teacher recruitment, teacher retention, just a number of different programs. I can tell you it's very, very controversial. We've been told, the speaker flat out told Mako and the county executives that she opposes the bill and nothing's going to be done to the blueprint. So, for example, if you look, there's a hearing scheduled in the Senate. There's no hearing scheduled on the blueprint in this bill in the House yet.
Has the county executive taken a position?
No.
Okay.
Great. Anyone? Yep, go ahead, Mel.
One thing I wanted to mention, I wanted to go back to Councilman Jawando's comments about the Fair Share Tax Plan. So there is another piece of the last year's Fair Share Tax Plan that is in the Budget Reconciliation Act, and that does relate to the state personal income tax plan that the governor has. They are not identical, the provisions at all. The governor's plan is certainly different than the Fair Share Tax Plan from last year, but there is a whole section in the Budget Reconciliation Act that addresses the governor's plan for the state personal income tax. And there is information about county-by-county impacts of his plan that the Comptroller's Office did release on Friday. And should anyone, want that, I can send a link to that plan.
Please do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's Councilmember Sayers.
Yes. If we can discuss House Bill 23. That's enabling legislation for us. So,
Yeah, that was the one I brought up.
Oh, that's the tech,
The
oh.
one that was introduced, you said in the House, but not in the Senate.
Correct.
And it had its hearing already
That's correct.
The House, yeah.
in the House. Yeah.
All right, I think we got a lot done today, more than I had anticipated, but sometimes that happens with state ledge. So we will meet again on the 24th and take up some more bills. If there are other things that people are seeing that they particularly want to take up, just let myself know, my office, or our state ledge team know, but otherwise we'll regroup and come present a memo with the bills that we'll take up on the 24th.
I'd just like to say we're kind of a 24/7 shop, so
Yeah.
anything that comes up whenever, send us a text or an email or give us a call and we'll step in and try and answer questions. So.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you very much for today, and we are adjourned.
Up doing things that are really mental health work. And the people who are doing what are crimes aren't doing high-level crimes or crimes that require a police officer. And most of these people require mental health support. And we need to basically be able to respond to people with the appropriate team. But we also need to enhance the mental health programs in the county. And this is a big issue at this